It started with a page almost nobody ever reads, a land registry entry for a house in Wiltshire, 1 page long, with 2 names printed near the bottom of it. Neither of those names belongs to the woman who has lived in that house for close to 30 years. Neither of them belongs to the king. Now, before you ask me the obvious question, I'm going to hold that answer back for a while, because it only lands properly once you know what that house cost, who paid for it, and who was never told what happened to it later. Stay with me on this one. It turns twice, and the second turn is the one that hurt. If you like stories where the paperwork tells the truth, long before the palace does, take a second and subscribe, because this is the kind of story that gets quietly corrected in about a week. Stay with me to the end, because that last page is where this whole thing lands. By the time we finish, you will know what sat inside that file. You will know which names went onto the paperwork and which name quietly came off it. And you will know why Anne, of all the people in that family, drove herself down a narrow Wiltshire lane on an ordinary weekday and made a woman sit down at her own kitchen table and listen. Let me take you back, because this does not start in a palace. It starts in an estate agent's window in 1996. Camilla held no title then, nothing royal about her at all. She was a divorced woman in her late 40s with 2 grown children, a name the newspapers used like a swear word, and a settlement to spend. Her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles had come through the year before. The tapes had been printed, the jokes had been made. Photographers sat outside her mother's house, waiting for her to come out with the shopping, so they could run a picture of her looking tired. And in 1996, she bought a house. Land registry records show the price, £850,000, for a Georgian property near Lecoq in Wiltshire called Ray Mill House. 6 bedrooms, a walled garden, a long drive, a gate that sits far enough back from the road that a lens cannot reach the front door. She bought it in her own name, with her own money, no trust and no company anywhere near it, and every single person who has written about that house since has used the same word about it. Hers. I want you to hold on to that word, because the whole story turns on it later. Quick note before we continue, everything I dig up that doesn't make it into these videos I put into a free weekly letter. Join more than 10,000 royal insiders at crownletter.com. The link is in the pinned comment below. If you're watching on your TV, just point your phone at the QR code on screen. Now think about what she was buying. The square footage was the least of it. She had been through a divorce in public, in front of a country that had already picked a side, and the side it picked was not hers. That house was the one place on earth where nobody could tell her to leave. No equerry, no press officer, no palace scheduler, no protection team deciding who came through the door. She could stand in her own kitchen with wet hair and a cigarette and be nobody's problem for an afternoon. There is a version of this story where that is the whole point, and honestly, for a lot of years it was. And I have to bring up the other name now because you cannot tell this story without her, and everybody watching knows it. Diana was still alive in 1996, still walking into rooms and turning every camera in them, still in the eyes of most of this country, the wronged one. The year Camilla bought her quiet house behind its long drive, Diana was on the front of every magazine, in every newsagent in Britain. And the contrast was the story. One woman could not buy a loaf of bread without it being photographed. The other bought a 6-bedroom house in Wiltshire, and the country barely blinked. Then came the summer of 1997, and everything about the shape of this family changed in a single night. And the woman in the Wiltshire house understood immediately that her situation had gone from difficult to impossible. She did not appear in public for a long stretch afterwards. She did not need advice on that one. She could read a room the size of a nation. She stayed behind the gate, and the gate did its job, and years went by. Here is where the paperwork starts to matter, and I promise you I will keep this simple, because I am not here to read you a conveyancing manual. In this country, the owner of a house has their name sitting on a register. That register is public. Anybody can pay a few pounds and pull the page. And the page says who owns it, and quite often, whether there is a mortgage sitting over the top of it. That is the entire system. It exists so that nobody can stand in a garden and lie about whose garden it is. And for a family that owns palaces, it does not technically own. Castles it cannot sell, and jewels it holds in trust for the next one along. A plain private house with one plain private name on the register is an unusual thing to be holding. It is the only kind of property in that family's life that can be sold on a Thursday and turned into cash. That is why the page matters. Not because paper is interesting, because that page is the difference between a house you live in and a house you can leave to your children. In 2005, she married Charles. She kept the house. In 2005, she became queen. She kept the house. Think about how strange that is for a second. This is a family that absorbs everything. Marry into it and your calendar belongs to it. Your friendships get audited. Your holidays get approved. Your children's names get chosen with one eye on the register of monarchs. And through all of that, through the wedding, through the accession, through the coronation, through the whole machine closing around her, one Georgian house in Wiltshire stayed outside the walls with her name on the page and nobody else's. Every royal correspondent in Britain has written some version of the same soft sentence about it. Her bolt hole, her sanctuary, the place she goes to be normal, sweet, harmless, human. I kept coming back to a different question. A house like that does not stay yours by accident once you are queen. Somebody has to decide every single year that it stays outside the arrangements. Somebody has to sign things. Somebody has to keep it clean, insured, staffed, repaired, and paid for. And the money for all of that has to arrive from somewhere and be recorded arriving. And the moment you start pulling on that thread, the sweet story about the sanctuary gets a lot less sweet. I am going to hold the file itself back a little longer, because if I put it in front of you now, it is a page of names and numbers, and you will look at it and shrug. You need to see who was standing where first. You need to know what the king thought he was paying for. Then the page will do what it did to me, which is sit in my chest for 2 days. Let me give you the next piece, and it is a real one. And it happened recently enough that some of you will remember reading it and thinking nothing of it at all. In 2025, the king bought the house next door. That is the real boring checkable version of it. The property beside Ray Mill House, an old mill on the same stretch of water, came up for sale, and Charles paid for it out of his own pocket. British newspapers put the figure at around £3 million. The reason given at the time was privacy. The building was going to be turned into a venue, weddings and events and hire cars coming up the lane, music carrying across the water on a Saturday night, strangers with drinks standing in a garden that looks straight at his wife's windows. So the king bought it and the problem went away. £3 million to stop a wedding venue. And when I first read that, I filed it under the same soft heading everybody else did. Devoted husband protects wife's privacy. Lovely. Next story. Then I sat with it, the way I do, and it stopped sitting right. Because a man in his 70s who owns Sandringham and Balmoral outright, who has Highgrove down the road, who has more square miles of Britain attached to his name than any private landowner you could name, does not usually spend £3 million of personal money to fix a noise problem at a house that is not his. That is a decision about somebody else's asset rather than a purchase. You spend that kind of money to protect a property when the value of that property matters to you. Or when the person who owns it has told you it matters to them very much. And here is the thing I keep turning over. The king bought the neighbor to protect the house. He did not buy the house. He could have. Any time in 20 years quietly at a fair price, and the whole thing folds into the estate and stops being a question forever. That is what this family does with property it once settled. Instead, the king spent £3 million protecting an asset that was never going to be his, on behalf of a wife whose name was on a page he had every right to look at, and, from what I can piece together, had not looked at in years. And I've gone looking for any sign that he tried, because that would settle the whole question. A refused offer, a family row about it. One line in somebody's memoir about the king wanting the Wiltshire house brought inside the arrangements and being told no. There is nothing there. No refusal, no argument, no trace of the question ever being put to anybody. A house sat outside the property arrangements of the British monarchy for 20 years, and as far as anybody has ever written down, nobody in that household asked out loud why. That is the first crack. Hold it in your hand while I show you the second. Somewhere in the last stretch, that registry page changed. Land registry records for Ray Mill House now carry two names, and neither of them is hers. One belongs to her son-in-law. The other belongs to a financier, a man with no royal connection at all, whose job is looking after other people's money. Those two are understood to be acting on behalf of her children, Tom and Laura. Sources close to the Queen say the change formalizes family arrangements and keeps the house private rather than commercial. Read that sentence again. Because press offices choose words the way surgeons choose knives. Formalizes family arrangements. In plain English, it means this. The house Camilla bought with her divorce money in 1996, the one house in that woman's life that was hers alone, no longer has her name on the ownership page. It sits under the names of two men acting for her children. She still lives there. She still walks the dogs there. She will die in that house if she gets her way. On paper, though, it has already gone past her and landed on the other side, where the Crown cannot follow it and the Crown cannot claim it. That is not illegal. Let me be clear. Families with money do this constantly, and any decent solicitor in the country would tell you it is sensible. Move the asset while you are well, and the tax people take less of it later. Perfectly ordinary. Ordinary for a private family. This is not a private family, because there is a second question sitting underneath, and it is the one that gave me 2 bad nights, and it is the question this whole video is about. The paperwork is done, the names are on it, the arrangements are formalized. Somebody had to tell the king. Now, nobody has confirmed what was said inside that marriage, and I would not insult you by pretending otherwise. I can put the timeline in front of you and let you watch what people did. Because actions leave marks that statements never do, and the marks here are ugly. Follow it with me. The king spends £3 million of his own money in 2025 to protect the value and the peace of a house in Wiltshire. That is a man behaving like the house matters to him, and I would guess like the house is part of the shape of his life. Around that same stretch of time, the ownership page of that same house is being rearranged so that the house belongs, in every way the law recognizes, to her children. Both of those things can be true and innocent. Sure. And a man can also write a very large check to protect something he has already been quietly written out of. I told you this one turns twice. That was the first turn. And I want to bring Diana in here, because this is exactly the shape of the thing that has been driving her elder son for 25 years, and if you miss this, the rest of the story looks like an argument about a house. Diana's whole ending, the part William watched from the inside as a boy, was about arrangements made around her instead of with her. Decisions taken in rooms she was not in. Papers signed by people who spoke about her in the third person while she was still in the building. Her title handled, her security handled, her position handled. All of it done properly, all of it done politely, and none of it done in front of her. That is the wound, and it sits under the affair and the divorce and the tapes rather than beside them. The paperwork moved while she was still standing there. William was 15 when he walked behind her coffin in a dark suit with his head down and half the world watching his neck. Whatever else that boy took out of that week, he took out a very particular allergy. He cannot stand it when the documents say one thing and the family says another. He has spent his adult life pulling files, checking who signed what, asking who was in the room. Every person who has worked near him says a version of the same thing. He reads the paperwork himself. And when I tell you that William got hold of a file about a house in Wiltshire, I need you to understand that this was not a man being nosy about his stepmother's property. This was a man checking whether it was happening again. Here is how a file like that reaches a man like him, and it is far less dramatic than you are imagining. Nobody breaks into anything. Nobody slides an envelope under a door at midnight. In a household that size, property questions travel through the people who handle property, and those people write things down. Because writing things down is the only way anybody survives, working for that family for longer than a year. A query goes out about insurance on a private property in Wiltshire. A second query goes out about who signs for the work on the roof. Somebody in an office in London opens the registry page to answer the question properly, prints it, and puts it in a folder with everything else that came in that week. And the folder goes up the line. That is all. The system did what the system does, and the page landed in front of a man who reads pages. Now, this next part is my reading of it rather than anybody's confirmed account, and I will say that once and then get out of the way. From what I can put together, William did not go looking for that house. The house came to him inside a routine folder about maintenance costs, and he opened it the way you open a gas bill. And then he stopped, and he went back to the top of the page, and he read the two names again. Neither of them was hers. Neither of them was his father's. Sit with what that afternoon was like. He is a man who has spent his whole adult life being told that the arrangements are being handled. He has heard that sentence in every register a British voice can produce. And here is a page telling him that a house his father spent £3 million protecting had already been handed onward, in law, to two men acting for the children of a previous marriage that ended before he was old enough to read. He did not shout. Everybody who knows him says the same thing about him under pressure. He gets quiet, and he gets slow, and he starts asking for the next document. The next document is where it stops being tidy. According to a documented account of that week, what came back was not one page. It was a run of them going back years, invoices for work at the property, payments for a garden wall, for a roof, for a heating system, for a run of fencing along a lane, insurance renewals, a schedule of contents, and running through those papers, appearing and disappearing and appearing again. A set of arrangements that had been quietly renewed year after year without ever once being put in front of the man who was paying for a large part of it. Insiders say the phrase that came back from the office when somebody finally asked the obvious question out loud was that the king had been kept comfortable. Kept comfortable. That is how it gets described, when a household decides a man does not need to be troubled with the detail. He signs what he is given, he is told the matter is in hand, and everybody protects him from the paperwork. And he thanks them for it. Because he is in his 70s, he has been treated for cancer in front of the whole country, and he has a diary of engagements to get through with a smile on his face. You can call that kindness if you want to. I have watched this family long enough to know that in that house, kindness and management wear the same coat. And I want to give you one small thing out of that run of papers because it tells you more than any of the numbers do. There is a renewal in there, one of the dull annual ones. And it carries a note in the margin in somebody's handwriting saying the king need not be troubled with this. Need not be troubled. A head of state, a man who has signed treaties and opened parliaments, and a member of his own staff writing in the margin of a page about his wife's house that he need not be troubled with it. Nobody meant any harm by that line. And that is what makes it worse. Somebody wrote it kindly on a wet Tuesday and filed it, and then the filing carried on for years. Somebody left a comment under one of my videos a while back, and it has stayed with me since. Because it is the sharpest thing anybody has said to me about these people. They said they never lie to him, they stopped telling him things until the telling would be embarrassing. I read that comment 3 times, and then I read this file, and the comment fitted it like a key. Now, Anne, you need to understand why she is the one in this story and not a private secretary, not a lawyer, not a press office. Anne is the only person in that family who can walk into a room, say a hard sentence, and walk out again without it becoming a war. She has no ambition inside it. She wants nothing from anybody. She has done the job for 50 years without ever once briefing a newspaper about how hard she works, and every single person in that family knows that when Anne turns up in the middle of the week without a photographer, something has gone wrong at the level of the family rather than the institution. William did not send the file to lawyers. He took it to his aunt. And the reason he took it to her is the reason this story ends the way it ends. He knew what would happen if it went the official route. It would be handled. It would be reviewed. It would be noted. Somebody would use the word appropriate 4 times in a paragraph, and the file would come back 6 weeks later with a recommendation that no further action was required. and his father would never see a single page of it. That is the machine. That machine ate his mother. Anne read it in one sitting. Sources suggest she asked exactly 2 questions, and the second one was whether the king had ever been given a copy. The answer was no. She drove herself down. That detail is the detail, and everybody who has ever worked around her will tell you it is exactly right. No convoy, no press call, no advance notice to the household, only a Land Rover on a Wednesday and a woman in a headscarf who has been driving herself around the west of England since before most of us were born. The gate at Ray Mill House is set well back from the lane. You cannot see the front of the house from the road, which was always the point of it. She came up the drive, parked badly, took a green folder off the passenger seat, and knocked on a private door in a private house that no longer, on paper, belonged to the woman who answered it. No aides, no officials, no note-taker. That is important, and I will tell you why in a moment because it changes what happened next in a way the household did not expect. I am going to hold the last part of the folder back for a few more minutes. If I read it to you now, it is a list of payments, and you will hear numbers and drift off, and I need you awake for it. Stay with me, because when the folder opens at that kitchen table, 3 separate things come out of it. And the third one is the reason the king stopped speaking for the rest of that afternoon. The kitchen at Ray Mill House is not a grand room. Low ceiling, a long scrubbed table, dogs on a bed in the corner, a cooker that has been there longer than the marriage. That is the room where this happened, according to a documented account of the conversation, and I keep thinking about that because everything else in these people's lives happens in rooms designed to make somebody feel small. This one was designed for tea. Camilla made it, 2 cups. She has never in her life let anybody else make it in that kitchen. Anne put the green folder on the table and did not open it straight away. She asked after the dogs. She asked after Tom. She let a silence run longer than a silence is meant to run, which is a thing she does and which people who know her find almost unbearable. Then she opened it. The first thing out of that folder was the registry page. 1 sheet, 2 names printed near the bottom, a son-in-law and a financier, acting for 2 adult children. Anne turned it around so it faced the right way for the woman opposite her and put 1 finger on the line where a name should have been and was not. Camilla did not pretend she had never seen it. Give her that much. She said it had been done properly, that solicitors had handled all of it, that this is what people do with a house when they are sensible, that it changes nothing about how anybody lives. Anne said, I know what it changes. I want to know who was told. The second thing out of the folder was the run of payments, years of them. Work on the roof of a house that was moving out of one set of hands and into another, paid for through arrangements that traced back at the end of every chain to the king's own money. A wall, a boiler, a stretch of fencing along the lane so the dogs could run without going near the road. Small things, ordinary things, thousands of pounds at a time, hundreds of thousands over a decade, all of it landing on a property that had been quietly promised elsewhere. And Camilla said the thing that everybody in her position says, and I want you to hear it, because it is the most honest sentence in this entire story. She said he has never once asked. That is true, by the way. I believe her completely. Charles does not ask. He is a man who has had money handled for him since he was a child, who has never carried a wallet in his life, who signs where the little pencil cross goes and moves on to the next thing, because there are 11 more things that afternoon. Whole careers in that household have been built on the fact that he does not ask. Anne knows that better than anybody alive. She grew up next to it. She said, that is not the same as him knowing. Then the third thing came out of the folder, and this is the one I told you to stay awake for. It was a dated page, a record of when the ownership arrangements were put in motion, signed and witnessed, with the month sitting there in black type at the top of it. And the month was before the king wrote his check for the mill next door, before the £3 million of his own money went out to buy a neighbouring building, so that no wedding party would ever spoil the view from those windows. Take a second with that. The house had already been moved. The names were already going onto the page. The arrangements were already, in that beautiful word, formalized. And then the King of the United Kingdom, in his 70s, in the middle of treatment, reached into his own pocket and spent £3 million protecting the value and the peace of a property that his wife had already signed onward to her children. He believed he was protecting their home, and what he was doing was topping up somebody else's inheritance and thanking the room for the chance to help. I sat with that page for a long time before I recorded this. The money was not the part that got me. That family loses £3 million down the back of a sofa in a bad quarter. The sequence got me. Somebody knew the order of those events and let him write the check anyway. Anne looked at the date, and then she looked up and she said the sentence that this whole story lives on. She said he was never told. Nobody sat him down for it, over dinner or in a car between two engagements, where these people do most of their real talking. A man had signed away £3 million to protect something he no longer had any part of, and the woman across the table had let him do it. And the reason she let him do it is the part that turns this from a scandal into something sadder. Camilla did not deny it. She said, "I have to think about my children, and you know what? That is a real answer. It is not a good one, but it is real, and I am not going to stand here and pretend the woman has no case, because she does, and it goes like this. Her children have no titles. They have no allowances. They have no houses waiting for them, no duchy, no estate, no line of succession with their names anywhere on it. The day Charles dies, and he is not a well man, the doors close. William becomes king, Catherine becomes queen, and Tom and Laura become two middle-aged people who used to be photographed at Christmas. Every single thing their mother has, she holds because she is married to a man in his late 70s who has been treated for cancer in public. She has watched this family absorb in property her whole adult life. She knows exactly how it works. If that house is still in her name on the day he dies, it becomes a question for the household, and the household will handle it. And handling it means committees and lawyers and a story in the papers about the widow's private property. If it is already gone, it is already gone. The way she reads it, she was getting her children out of the building before the doors shut. And here is the cruelty of it. And this is why Diana never leaves this story. That is exactly what Diana was trying to do at the end. Diana spent the last 2 years of her life trying to make sure her boys would have things that were hers rather than the institution's. Letters, jewelry, a list of items for the people she loved, all of it written down, all of it arranged, all of it done because she had learned the hard way that this family absorbs everything, and then explains afterwards that it was always theirs. 2 women, 30 years apart, in different houses, doing the same frightened arithmetic about their sons. The difference is who got to keep the paperwork. Anne left before the light went. She took the folder with her and she left one sheet on the table, face up, which is the most Anne thing in this entire account. She did not need to say anything else. She left the page where the tea had been. Then she drove to see her brother. I have thought about that drive more than any other part of this. An hour and a bit of country road, a woman in her 70s who has spent 50 years never once making a family problem into a public one, working out how to tell a man with a serious illness that his wife's house has already gone past him, that the money he spent protecting it went into somebody else's pocket, and that his own household knew the order of events and kept him comfortable. She told him in a small sitting room with the door shut. No private secretary. No note-taker. Her rule, not his. The people who were in the building that evening say the king did not raise his voice. He asked her to show him the dated page, and he read it, and then he read it again. And then he put it down on the table and looked out of the window for a long time without saying anything at all. Somebody brought tea in and took it out again untouched. Sources close to that evening suggest he asked one question, and it was not about money. He asked how long the household had known. Nobody wanted to answer that one. Now, I am not going to sell you a scene where a king throws a lamp. He is not built that way, and anybody who tells you otherwise is writing fiction. I can tell you what changed afterwards, because changes leave paperwork, and paperwork is the only witness in this family that does not have a career to protect. Within weeks, the private office that handled the Wiltshire property stopped handling it. The review pulled every maintenance arrangement that had run for years on a nod and a renewal into writing. Payments for work on that house came off the king's side of the ledger and went where they belonged, which is to the people whose names sit on the register. Nobody announced it, nobody had to, and that is where the small scene happened that I cannot get out of my head. And it is the reason I wanted to make this video at all. Late summer, a weekday, the gate at the end of that long Wiltshire drive. New arrangements mean new access lists. And new access lists mean a man on a clipboard, and the man on the clipboard is 26 years old and doing his job properly for the first week in a new post. A car comes up the lane. The Queen is in it, coming back from an appointment, sitting in the back the way she always does. And the young man checks his list. He is not being cruel. He has been handed a sheet with the registered owners and the authorized names on it, and told to work through it properly, because the arrangements have changed and everything now goes through the people whose names are on the page. He runs his finger down it looking for the name he expects to find at the top, and it is not at the top, and it is not in the middle, and he goes back up and starts again while the car sits there with the engine running. She watched him do it. Through the glass, from the back seat, at the gate of the house she bought in 1996 with her own money. The one place in the world that was hers, while a boy who was not born when she bought it looked for her name on a list and could not find it. He found it eventually further down, under a heading about permitted occupants. The gate opened. She said nothing to the driver. That evening she did not come out again. Permitted occupant. In the house she chose the curtains for. The young man on the gate has no idea what he did. He went home that evening and told nobody, because from where he was standing nothing had happened at all. A car waited 40 seconds longer than usual while he worked through a sheet somebody had handed him. That is the thing about paperwork with teeth. It does the damage through people who are being perfectly polite. That is what people mean when they talk about paperwork having teeth. She had made a sensible decision with good solicitors to protect her children, and every single word of it was legal, and none of it changed how she lives or where she sleeps, and it cost her the one line that mattered, which was the line that said the house was hers. Now let me bring William back, because he had been quiet for a fortnight, and quiet is what he does before he moves. He did not go to the press. I want to be very clear about that, because there is a version of this story going around that has him briefing a newspaper, and everything I understand about that man says he would sooner take a beating. He has spent his whole life watching what briefing does to people. It killed the version of his mother that the country remembers and left the cartoon behind. He moved slower than that and much harder to argue with. He asked for the same review to be run across every private arrangement inside both households. Every property, every renewal, every payment made on behalf of somebody whose name was not on the paperwork. He wanted it written down, and he wanted it dated, and he wanted a copy to sit with his father rather than with the office. Insiders say the sentence he used was, "From now on he sees his own papers." That is the punishment, if you want to call it one. No titles removed, no doors slammed, no announcement from a palace. He took away the comfortable arrangement where a 70-something man with a serious diagnosis signs what he is handed and is protected from the detail by people who love him and by people who benefit. The management stopped. For a woman whose entire position rests on being the person closest to that man, on being the one who knows what he needs before he asks, on being the buffer between him and the noise, that is the floor going out from under her. And then, because this is Britain and nothing stays inside a house, one photograph got out. One frame, a long lens from the lane, taken through a gap in the hedge on a grey afternoon. And it is not a scandalous picture at all. That is why it worked. A car at a gate. A young man in a dark coat holding a clipboard. A window half down. A woman in the back seat with her face turned away and her hand up near the glass. A picture editor in London looked at that and understood immediately what he was holding, because the caption writes itself, and by the following morning it was on a front page with 4 words under it about a queen being checked at her own gate. The story that ran was careful. It talked about a review of private arrangements. It used the phrase land registry, which is a phrase that has never once appeared in a headline about that family and did not need explaining to anybody. because everybody in this country understands what it means when a house stops being in your name. It said the king had been unaware. It said the Prince of Wales had asked for the review. It quoted nobody, and it did not have to. And the reaction was not what the palace expected, and it was not what I expected either. Nobody cared about the £3 million. Not a soul. Try to sell a British audience outrage about a wealthy man overpaying for a mill, and you will be waiting a long time. One line went through that country like weather, buried down in the 4th paragraph, about a man in his 70s in treatment signing a check to protect a house that had already been signed away with nobody in his own household telling him. Because every family in Britain has watched some version of that happen to somebody they love. The elderly father whose accounts are being handled. The mother who is protected from the detail. The paperwork moving around a person while everybody agrees they must not be worried by it. That is a story about your own uncle rather than a story about a king, and it landed exactly there. By the weekend, there was a woman standing outside the gates in London with a piece of card and a marker pen, and it said, "Tell him yourself." 3 words. She stood there for 2 hours and then she went home. The photographers ran it everywhere, and the palace could not answer it, because answering it means confirming there was something to tell. The king made no statement. He carried out 3 engagements that week, and in the pictures from all 3 he looks exactly as he always looks, which is to say polite and tired and slightly amused by something nobody else can see. He shook hands. He asked people about their gardens. Whatever happened in that sitting room stayed in that sitting room, and it will stay there because he is the last man in Britain who was raised to believe that is a virtue. The Queen carried on too. Of course she did. She has never once in 20 years given the cameras the reaction they came for, and that discipline is the whole reason she survived the years when this country hated her. She smiled, she visited a school, she talked about reading and about dogs, and none of it made the front page, because a woman doing her job properly does not sell papers when a picture of her at a gate exists. And the new rule went in quietly, the way real rules always do in that family. Every private property arrangement across both households now runs through a single written schedule that goes to the king directly, not to the office, to him, dated, listed, and signed for. Any change of ownership involving anybody inside the family gets recorded on that schedule before it is executed rather than after. It is a dull, small, bureaucratic thing, and it is the most brutal document produced inside that family in a decade, because of what it says between the lines about the last 20 years. The schedule exists because a page came out of a green folder on a kitchen table in Wiltshire. Now let me finish where these things always finish for me, and I know some of you have been waiting for it. Some years ago, in a room at Kensington Palace, 2 boys were shown a list of their mother's things, letters, jewelry, small objects with no value to anybody outside that family, all of it written down because Diana had worked out, late and at great cost, that in that world a thing is only yours if it is yours on paper. She had learned it the hard way. Her title was arranged around her. Her security was arranged around her. Her position was reviewed by men who called her ma'am while they did it. And by the end, she trusted a written page more than she trusted a promise made in a good voice. Her elder son learned that lesson at 15 in a dark suit, and he has never unlearned it. Every file he pulls, every date he checks, every time he asks who signed and when, he is that boy again, standing in a room where the grown-ups have already decided and are now explaining it to him kindly. That is why this was never about a house in Wiltshire. His father has money enough to lose a house and never feel it, and that was never the point. He was making sure that a man he loves did not spend the last part of his life the way his mother spent the last part of hers, which is to say, surrounded by people being kind to him while the paperwork moved behind his back. And Camilla, who is not a fool and never has been, understood that better than anybody the moment she saw who was standing at her kitchen door. Anne, with a green folder and no witnesses, which is the family's way of saying this stops here and it stops privately, and you will not be given the dignity of a fight. She is still in the house. She will be in the house next summer, and the summer after that, walking the dogs down the lane past the mill her husband bought with his own money, for a view she had already promised to somebody else. Nothing about her days has changed at all. She has to say her name at the gate now and wait while a young man with a clipboard runs his finger down a list looking for it and finds it in the end, further down under permitted occupants. In the house she bought in 1996 to be the one place on earth where nobody could ever ask her who she was. She got her children out of the building before the doors shut. Good for her. That is what a mother does. She forgot that the man holding the door open for her was standing there because nobody had told him what he was holding. If you'd like more of this, I write a free letter every week. Join more than 10,000 Royal Insiders at crownletter.com. The link's in the pinned comment. If you're watching on your TV, just point your phone at the QR code on screen and I'll see you there.